So it is completely hopeless. I listened to Sean Carroll's podcast last night. It's episode 233, I think. I'll put a link to it. But anyway, there I learned that propaganda doesn't work. I've been misled about that. I thought something like the Nazi propaganda or something could work, but no, it doesn't work. It doesn't change people's minds. It just makes it easier to do evil things, because if you already hate the Jews or something, you can know there won't be any punishment if you act on it. So propaganda can still have really bad effects, just not what you think. It doesn't change people's minds. And now, if I couldn't even do it with the propaganda machinery of the Nazis, then obviously I'm not going to do it on my own. Just speaking isn't going to persuade anybody. Activism is hopeless. So I only do it for myself as therapy, so that I know that somebody was against the witch hunt. Somebody didn't want to persecute victimless sexuality, and made it clear, put it on the record that I don't support it, even if it makes me an outcast. And it does. I know it will always be that way, because people will keep believing the feminist myths about sexuality, because that is what gives them social support. Even if they realize I am right, they will keep their mouth shut. They will not join my movement, because then you lose social support. You lose your job, you lose your friends, you risk persecution by the police, and it's just not a good situation for you. The only benefit is moral. You know you did the right thing. But hardly anybody is willing to give up their life for their moral integrity. So they adjust their morality to be tolerant. I mean, they don't have this dissonance. They just adjust their beliefs according to the dogmas, so that they don't feel like there's a persecution going on. So they don't feel there is a witch hunt against sexuality. You're not going to feel that. You're not going to care. Just like people didn't care, presumably didn't care during historical witch hunts. Presumably they believed in that persecution enough to not oppose it. So that's what we have to expect. I don't even know anybody. I don't know the name. So anybody at the time who spoke like me against the witch hunts. There might have been, and they didn't get recorded very well. Or I'm not informed. But it just seems to me that, no, you have the normies, and you basically only have the normies. And then the people who get persecuted in a witch hunt, they don't make a movement either. Like they don't now. A lot of them are brainwashed to believe they're perpetrators, so even as they are punished maximally, it hardly even enters their head that there's something wrong. And that's how witch hunts operate. And I can give up thinking that I'm going to persuade anybody. I'm not. But I am going to have a clean conscience that I did something. I spoke out against this. And I'm glad I did, even if it makes me completely alone. I know I will only ever get anonymous followers, anonymous comments, only get likes from anonymous accounts. Nobody is going to put their name on any kind of support for me. Like even my family betrayed me, and of course a stranger will be completely this will be out of the question to risk all that. Everything you lose from being against feminism, they're not gonna they're not going to do that. And even the criminals have this idea in their heads that they still have something to lose. So they're not going to even want to put their names in the paper. Or put it out in such a way as to be egocentric. They're going to appear as if they go along with the idea that they did something wrong and they need to atone and be reformed and so forth. I alone am an egocentric, sexually normal man in Norway. There's nobody else. I am the whole men's movement. The last one, besides me, that I remember, was Tor Stuff. He said the same things, the very same things. After he died a few years ago, there was only me. Only me. To take sexuality's side in the war on sex. And it's hopeless. Hopeless if I thought I was going to convince anybody. But it's not hopeless if my goal is to have a clean conscience and know I did the right thing. So even with that in mind, I am glad I did. So I listened to Sean Carroll's Mindscape podcast yesterday. It was episode 233 with Hugo Mercier, I think his name was. And it makes you think, don't it? I mean, propaganda doesn't work. Even the Nazis couldn't persuade anybody to, for example, to be against the Jews or something. If they didn't have those opinions already, you can't change people's minds. But what you can do, you can make it easier for hateful people to do hateful things when you make it clear that the government supports those opinions. So it doesn't work the way you think, but it can still work in some ways. And cause horrible things. But that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about how hopeless it is as an activist. If you can't even, if I had that kind of propaganda machinery that the Nazis had, even with that, we couldn't have turned people against the feminists. So that's how entrenched the anti-sex bigotry right now is, if we believe that. I mean, if you believe that propaganda doesn't work. And another point there. They said it's rational sometimes to believe falsehoods because it's rational to depend on your group. So even if you see it's bullshit, you go along with it and you more or less believe it. So if the normies understand that I have good points, they understand that the sexual abuse myths are bullshit, but you know. So what? They're not going to go against them because then they would lose support of the group. They would lose the social support. They would be in my pariah caste, you know, which cannot offer any support because I have nothing. And so, even if you realize that I'm right, you're not going to say publicly that you agree with me. At best, you're going to leave an anonymous comment. You're not going to join my movement and put your name and face out there as a sexualist. Because you rely on the social support of the normie state. And if you become like me, you have nothing except rock bottom welfare, right? Yeah, you would lose your job, you would lose your friends, you would be hunted by the cops. Until they give up like they did with me. But so you probably won't do that. And that is, I'm sorry to say this, but yeah, it's rational. It's rational to believe lies if it means the difference between being an outcast and being a functional member of society. So, we don't have any hope. As men, we don't have any hope to legalize our sexuality. We will have this low-grade war, more or less low-grade. I mean, it can ramp up, but it's still not gonna turn men against it, right? They can hunt down men at will, and people won't wake up because they rely on the social network that is wrapped up in these bigoted and false beliefs about sexuality. So even something like the female sex offender charade, women are not going to go against that. You know, you see it's bullshit. I mean, you might as well persecute people who are born on Tuesdays or something. And you can understand that's nonsense, but if you live in a society where it's considered evil to have been born on a Tuesday, then you're not gonna go against that persecution. If I'm the only one doing it, and I'm an outcast with no support, no network around me, you're not going to join my movement. And the female sex offender charade is worse than just persecuting people for no reason, because it's actually persecuting women for being extra nice. You're singling out women who do good deeds. So it's worse, but even that, it's not going to turn anybody publicly against the state. That is reserved for extreme cases like me and Nathan Larson. Hardly anyone else. Publicly. I mean, the only exceptions to that, public exceptions, are the pedophiles who are already outcast just for being that. If you're just a normal man and you don't have that stigma, but you realize the sex laws are messed up, then you're not going to go against the sex laws. You realize a lot of your normal sexuality is criminalized. And you realize it's complete nonsense. But you're not going to speak out against it. You're not going to join my movement. You're going to keep your mouth shut. So we don't have hope. All I can do is to make myself feel a little bit better that I at least spoke out about this and I dedicated my life to activism. And hopefully some of that will survive through these dark times. And then I will be an example of the good side. If you look back now to historical witch hunts, I don't even know any examples. There might have existed somebody like me who were against them at the time, against the witch hunts. I don't know. But right now, there's a better chance that some of this information can survive. Since we can archive things as long as we have industrial civilization, and as long as we don't let the memory hold us, right? You don't need to put your name out there to preserve the sexualist writings and videos. So I hope you at least do that. But yeah, I realize after listening to Sean Carroll's podcast now, just how hopeless it is to make people change their minds. And there we also learned about the evolution of reasons. And why do we have reasons? Humans have reasons for doing things. It's mostly an afterthought, something we tack on. And we came up with that because, well, so the story goes, that you can justify your behavior with reasons to show you're a good person, even if you make mistakes, right? So your social group will realize you meant well. You had good reasons for doing things that had some bad outcomes, and so they're gonna accept you anyway. That's the thinking of the evolutionary explanation for why humans have reasons, or speak of reasons, because animals don't do that. They just act. They don't have this meta thinking about why they do things, and they're not going to explain to you. Even if they could talk, they couldn't explain why they do things, because they don't have that mental models in their heads of why they do things. And they can only occasionally understand an explanation given to them. Like if you point at something, like there is the food, and go this way or something, you can tell a dog how to go around the house if one door is locked or something. That can work, but only because those animals are domesticated. They have this limited ability to understand some of that, but they're not doing it at the level of understanding reasons. They're just they're accepting that people help them, because that also doesn't happen among chimpanzees, for example. A chimpanzee cannot or will not point to a solution for another chimpanzee, or very rarely. And therefore they don't understand pointing. Unless they've been around humans a lot, then maybe they can understand pointing too. So one chimpanzee is not going to point to where the food is, or to help another chimpanzee, because they don't think that the others are going to be nice to them. So that is a uniquely human skill, to have an explanation for what we do. And that explanation is supposedly there so that we can have this kind of virtue ethics, I guess. That's the reason. We have evolved explanations so that we can have virtue ethics instead of just this uncooperative chimpanzee world. So yeah, sometimes you can forgive, or a lot of times actually, you can forgive somebody for messing up if you knew that they were trying to be helpful. But there are limits to this, of course, as well. Like my family, who betrayed me and helped the police, even if they were thinking in their heads that they were, on some level, helping me, that is going way too far. That is evil. That is not something we can ever be forgiven. But I appreciate this point that we evolved reasons so we can cooperate and be a little bit forgiving. That's good. But not so forgiving that you can forgive complete treason. That even if they were thinking, they were probably thinking that I could be reformed and made into a feminist normie, right? But that would only happen over my dead body. So you can't conjure up an Avon that doesn't believe his opinions, right? And likewise, I can't convince anybody else either. Well, except sometimes. But then not to the extent that you're going to do it publicly. You're not going to stand for my movement publicly. I realize that's just not going to happen. I'm going to be alone. I'm going to be the only public face of the men's movement. And I'm not going to get public followers on any of my social media. Only anonymous followers and anonymous comments. So nobody has the balls to stand alongside me and be publicly socially responsible for that. I just have to realize that. That's just the way it is. So that's what I have to live with.